In the book The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, Chapter 1 Introduction provides an overview of how scientific revolutions occur and why they are important. It begins with a discussion on what constitutes normal science, that is, research conducted within existing paradigms or accepted theories in order to solve puzzles posed by nature. This type of work can be seen as puzzle-solving rather than revolutionary. It does not challenge established beliefs but instead works within them to find solutions for specific problems. However, when anomalies arise which cannot be explained using current models, then this leads to crisis situations where new ideas must emerge if progress is going to continue being made in understanding our world better. These moments mark the beginning stages of a revolution, one which will eventually lead either towards acceptance or rejection depending upon whether its proponents can successfully make their case against those who oppose change from traditional ways thinking about things. In Chapter 2 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn examines the process by which a scientific community moves from one paradigm to another. He begins with an examination of how normal science is conducted within a given framework and then looks at what happens when anomalies arise that cannot be explained using existing paradigms. In particular, he focuses on two types: those that can be resolved through further research or experimentation, and those for which no resolution appears possible without changing the underlying assumptions about reality itself, i.e., revolutionary changes. To illustrate this point, Kuhn uses examples such as Copernicus' heliocentric model replacing Ptolemy's geocentric view in astronomy, Lavoisier's oxygen theory supplanting phlogiston theory in chemistry, Newtonian mechanics displacing Aristotelian dynamics in physics, etc. Kuhn argues that scientists are often reluctant to abandon their current theories even if they have been proven wrong, because doing so would require them to relearn much material already mastered under the old system, a costly endeavor both intellectually and financially speaking. As such, it takes time before new ideas become accepted into mainstream thought, due largely to inertia among practitioners who prefer not having their work disrupted too drastically all at once but rather gradually over time until eventually everyone has adopted whatever change was necessary for progress towards better understanding our world around us. Chapter 3 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn focuses on the nature and purpose of normal science. Normal science is defined as research that works within an existing paradigm or accepted set of beliefs about a particular field. It involves solving puzzles posed by anomalies in data collected from experiments conducted under this paradigm. It does not involve questioning the underlying assumptions behind these paradigms themselves. This type of work allows scientists to make incremental progress towards understanding their fields better without having to challenge any fundamental aspects which could potentially lead them down paths with no clear answers or solutions at present time. In addition, normal science also serves as a way for new generations to learn how scientific inquiry should be done according to established standards so they can continue making advances in their respective disciplines over time. In Chapter 4 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn examines the concept and importance of paradigms in scientific research. He argues that a paradigm is an accepted model or framework for understanding phenomena within a particular field. It serves as both an example to be followed by researchers and also provides them with tools they can use to interpret their observations. Furthermore, he states that these paradigms are not static but rather evolve over time due to new discoveries being made which challenge existing theories. This process leads scientists towards more accurate models which better explain natural phenomena than those previously held before them. Finally, Kuhn emphasizes how important it is for any given scientist working on a problem at hand must first understand what the current dominant paradigm is so as not only make sense out of his/her own data but also contribute meaningfully towards advancing science itself through proposing novel ideas based upon this knowledge base already established by others who have come before him/her. In Chapter 5 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn examines the invisibility and unrecognized nature of scientific revolutions. He argues that while a revolution may be obvious in hindsight, it is often not recognized as such during its occurrence due to various factors including resistance from those who are invested in existing paradigms or lack knowledge about new developments. Furthermore, he suggests that even when revolutionary changes occur, they can remain invisible if there is no clear consensus on what constitutes progress within the field at hand. This leads to an inability for scientists to recognize their own work as part of a larger shift towards something different than before. Finally, Kuhn notes how some aspects related to paradigm shifts, such as theoretical advances made by individual researchers, may go unnoticed until much later because these discoveries do not necessarily lead directly into widespread acceptance among other members within the same discipline. Chapter 6 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn focuses on the resolution of revolutions. He begins with a discussion about how scientific theories are not necessarily replaced in their entirety, but rather modified and adjusted to fit new evidence or observations that arise during periods between revolutionary changes. This is followed by an examination into what happens when two competing paradigms exist within one field. He argues that this can lead to incommensurability, where neither theory can be judged against each other as they operate under different sets of assumptions and rules. Finally, Kuhn discusses the role played by scientists who work at resolving these conflicts through experimentation and observation, which eventually leads either towards acceptance or rejection for one paradigm over another, thus bringing closure to any given revolution in science. In Chapter 7 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn examines the nature and necessity of scientific revolutions. He begins by discussing how a paradigm shift occurs when an existing theory is replaced with a new one that better explains observed phenomena. This process involves both conceptual change, the replacement or modification of concepts, as well as methodological changes in order to accommodate the new ideas. In addition, he argues that such shifts are necessary for science to progress, since they allow scientists to move beyond their current understanding and explore more deeply into unknown areas. Furthermore, these revolutionary moments can be seen not only within individual sciences but also across different disciplines which share common paradigms. This allows them all to benefit from each other's discoveries and advances in knowledge collectively, rather than individually isolated fields working independently on similar problems without any cross-fertilization between them. Finally, Kuhn concludes his chapter by noting that although there may be some resistance at first due to vested interests or ideological differences among practitioners, ultimately it will always prove beneficial if accepted, because it leads towards greater clarity about our world through increased insight gained via interdisciplinary collaboration. Chapter 8 of Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions focuses on the concept that scientific theories are incommensurable. This means they cannot be compared or measured against one another in terms of their truth, accuracy, and completeness. To illustrate this point, Kuhn uses examples from physics to show how different paradigms, or accepted ways of thinking, can lead to completely different interpretations about a phenomenon even when looking at the same data set. He also discusses how scientists often use metaphors as tools for understanding phenomena which may not have an exact explanation yet. These metaphors help bridge gaps between two seemingly incompatible ideas but do not necessarily provide any real insight into what is actually happening within nature itself. Finally, he concludes by noting that while it might seem like science progresses linearly with each new theory replacing its predecessor entirely, this isn't always true, since some aspects remain unchanged despite changes in paradigm shifts over time. In Chapter 9 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn examines the problem posed by progress in scientific knowledge. He argues that there is no single answer to this question and suggests instead a variety of ways in which science can be seen as progressing over time. First, he discusses how new theories may replace old ones without necessarily being better or more accurate than their predecessors. Rather, they are simply different approaches to understanding phenomena. Second, he looks at how certain discoveries lead scientists down paths towards further exploration and discovery, a process known as cumulative growth, which leads to an increase in our overall body of knowledge about nature's laws and processes. Thirdly, Kuhn considers whether it is possible for any one theory or set of facts to provide us with absolute truth about reality. While some aspects might remain constant across all interpretations, such as mathematical equations, others will always depend on individual perspectives, due largely because we cannot observe everything from every angle simultaneously nor do experiments under identical conditions each time around, so results vary accordingly depending upon context/perspective, etc. Finally, Kuhn concludes that although progress does occur within science through these various means mentioned above, ultimately what counts most when assessing its success lies not only with the accumulation but also interpretation and application thereof, i.e., theories must prove useful if they are going to survive long enough for anyone else even consider them seriously. Chapter 10 of Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions examines the nature and extent to which rationality is involved in scientific change. He argues that while scientists may be rational, their decisions are often based on non-rational factors such as personal preference or social pressure. Furthermore, he suggests that even when a scientist does make an apparently rational decision, it can still have unintended consequences due to its embeddedness within a particular paradigm or worldview. In addition, Kuhn notes how different paradigms offer differing interpretations for the same data set, thus making any attempt at objective evaluation difficult if not impossible without some form of external validation from another source outside one's own framework. Finally, he concludes by suggesting that science should strive towards greater objectivity but acknowledges this will always remain limited given our subjective biases and preferences. Chapter 11 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn focuses on the response to a new paradigm within the scientific community. He argues that when confronted with an unfamiliar and unexpected set of facts, scientists will often reject them outright or attempt to explain away their significance in terms of existing theories. This is because they are unwilling or unable to accept any challenge which might undermine established beliefs and practices. However, if enough evidence accumulates over time, then it may eventually become impossible for even die-hard opponents to ignore its implications. At this point, some members may begin cautiously exploring alternative interpretations while others remain unconvinced until further proof can be provided. Ultimately, though, once sufficient support has been gathered around one particular interpretation, i.e., a new paradigm, then most, if not all, remaining opposition tends to dissipate as more researchers come on board with enthusiasm due largely. In Chapter 12 of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn revisits the nature and necessity of scientific revolutions. He begins by noting that a revolution is not simply an abrupt change in beliefs or practices but rather involves changes to both theory and practice at once. This means that it requires more than just new ideas, it also necessitates shifts in how those ideas are applied within the field as well as modifications to existing theories which may be necessary for accommodating them into current paradigms. In order for this process to occur successfully, there must exist some kind of consensus among scientists about what constitutes valid evidence and acceptable methods so they can agree on when something should count as revolutionary progress versus mere tinkering with details around accepted truths. Kuhn then goes on to discuss two different types of scientific revolutions: incommensurability, where one paradigm replaces another, and cumulative growth, which builds upon previous knowledge. While he acknowledges that these processes often overlap, he argues that incommensurable leaps forward tend towards being more significant because they involve radical rethinking from scratch, whereas cumulative growth tends towards incremental improvements over time without necessarily changing underlying assumptions too drastically, though even here major breakthroughs do sometimes happen due to their ability to build off prior work while still introducing novel concepts/ideas into play simultaneously. Finally, Kuhn concludes his chapter by reiterating why such drastic upheavals are essential components if science is ever going to move beyond its present state, namely because only through periodic disruptions like these will we continue making meaningful advances instead getting stuck repeating ourselves indefinitely. In the epilogue of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn argues that science is a social activity and must be regulated by society. He begins with an examination of how scientific revolutions are shaped by their historical context, noting that they often involve changes in both theory and practice. This leads him to consider the role played by scientists themselves in determining which theories will become accepted as part of mainstream science. In particular, he examines how individual scientists can influence what gets published or taught at universities through peer review processes or other forms of gatekeeping within academia. Kuhn then turns his attention to broader societal forces such as government funding for research projects and public opinion about certain topics like climate change or evolution versus creationism debates. These factors also play important roles in shaping scientific progress over time. Finally, he discusses some potential dangers associated with too much regulation from outside sources, for example censorship, but ultimately concludes that it's necessary if we want our knowledge base to remain accurate and up-to-date on current issues facing humanity today, especially those related directly back into policy decisions made based off this information. Ultimately though, despite all its complexities, there's no denying just how essential regulations have been throughout history when it comes down maintaining order amongst chaos. So long may continue being implemented going forward. Outro. Despite its complexity, regulating science has proven itself invaluable throughout history due largely thanks society's willingness embrace them, allowing us maintain order amidst chaos, ensuring accuracy remains forefront any decision-making process moving forwards.